Spread the fire. Welcome back to this emergency episode of SMWX. And we are back. If you're new around here, my name is Dr. Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh, and on this channel we explore South African politics through interviews and analysis. And by the way, things are only going to heat up on this channel. As you see, we are churning out content like it's going out of fashion. And in the build up to this election, this is the channel you want to be on. Former President Jacob Zuma will be on the ballot. Former President Jacob Zuma is on his way to Parliament, or at least he's legally permitted to be there. What does this mean? This is what we're going to analyze and explore in today's episode of SMWX. So we're going to look at three different dimensions. Number one, exactly what happened. What happened? The IEC, the list, Zuma, could he go? Can he not go? What does this decision mean and how did we get here? Number two, why did the court find for the MK party and former President Zuma? I'm going to analyze some of the arguments that were made before the court because they have wider democratic importance. And then, to end, we are going to look at the political implications. And my, are there some political implications? This election is becoming a movie of a movie, a series of a series, a book of a book. Okay, let's get into part one, which is what happened, how did we get here? Okay, so as you know, we've got this election coming up on the 29th of May. Now, political parties are able to submit their candidate lists to the IEC. And you'll remember this happened, so the ANC submitted its lists, President Ramaphosa, all of that, the EFF, the DA. And of course, the Sizwe party submitted their list. And guess who was top of their list? Well, of course, it was former President Jacob Zuma. Before then, there had been some doubt as to whether he would actually put his name forward for the list, because there was a suggestion from Tlamulo Ndlela, MK party spokesperson, that the main leaders would not go to parliament. But Zuma's name was on the list. Now, according to IEC procedure, any citizen, as far as I'm aware, or a person is allowed to object to any of those names. So they publish those lists, make them public once they've been vetted and finalized. And then people can say, no, I don't believe this person should be on the list because it breaks the law. Specifically, section 47(1)(e) of the Constitution. And we'll get there later and explain exactly how it works. But basically, there are certain disqualifications for being a member of the National Assembly. And you can say when the list is published, hey, I see this person on the list. They were convicted of a serious crime and they served sentenced to more than 12 months. I don't think they should be on the list, or for some other reason. Or I don't think this person is a citizen. In order to be elected to the parliament, you have to be a citizen. So that kind of thing. So there were objections raised to former President Zuma's existence on the list. The objections went to the IEC, and in a unanimous decision by the IEC, although one person recused themselves because they had ruled on former President Zuma's cases before, Judge Daya Pillay, I believe, the IEC unanimously upheld the objection. What does that mean? This person said, I don't think Zuma should be on the list for this and this reason. The IEC looked at the objection and said, you're right. We agree. Former President Zuma should not be on the list. It would be unlawful for him to be on the list because of his conviction and sentence. And you'll remember in 2021, when former President Zuma went to prison, South Africa has seen so much. We've seen so much as a nation. For that reason. Now, let's go back into that. Remember, it all goes back to the State Capture Commission, because former President Zuma was supposed to come back to the State Capture Commission where he had given evidence. He said, I'm not coming back. Then Judge Zondo, or the commission technically, tried to get him to come back. The Constitutional Court said he should go back. He still said, I'm not coming back, in which case he was in contempt of the Constitutional Court. And they said, even though you're not going to have a trial, even though you don't have the right to lead evidence and cross-examine witnesses, as usually happens when there is a criminal conviction, because of this contempt of the highest court of the land, because that's such a serious and a flagrant violation of the law, and because contempt of court, especially the highest court in the land, the constitutional court, is seen as at least a hybrid civil and criminal offense, if not just a crime. Sometimes it is described as a crime, and the Constitutional Court in its order described it as such. Because of that, you are going to jail as the punishment. And former President Zuma went to jail. And his sentence from the Constitutional Court was 15 months. And because of that, the Constitution kicked in, and we're going to get to why. And the person who objected said that because former President Zuma had been to jail for a specific and was sentenced to a specific term, he did not qualify to be a member of parliament and should therefore be removed from the list. Then MK Party went to the Electoral Court and challenged that decision and said, no, the IEC was wrong to say that. There are good reasons why former President Zuma should be able to be a member of the National Assembly. And today, the court said the MK Party was right. They didn't give their reasons because they had to turn around the judgment in 24 hours, but they ordered that the IEC's decision to effectively preclude former President Zuma from the ballot be set aside, and that he effectively can now go to parliament if he wishes. So that's where we are. Let's talk about some of the arguments, because I think it's really important to go into this case, see which arguments were made, because there were many legal analysts, legal gurus, legal PhDs, advocates on social media saying that they knew exactly how this case was going to go, and it went a very different way. And I tend to find this in terms of legal analysis in South Africa. People jump to conclusions without listening to the arguments and without being familiar with the case. And then they sometimes get surprised when the court outcome is different to the social media expectation. So let's have a look at exactly what was argued. Okay, so before the court, really there was one key argument. Does the Constitution prevent someone in former President Zuma's position from being allowed to be a member of the National Assembly, and therefore disqualified by the IEC from being allowed to be on the list? Now, before we get into the merits of this argument and the merits of the arguments that were made before court, and there were good arguments made on both sides of this case, we need to appreciate one thing that seemed to resonate with the court. And that was that when it comes to preventing people from voting or from standing for political office, the Constitution and constitutional jurisprudence, in other words, case law, says that we must be very careful when we denude people of those what are called political rights, which are enshrined in Section 19 of the Constitution. And Section 19 forms part of the wider Bill of Rights, Chapter 2 of the Constitution, which is really the cornerstone of South Africa's constitutional architecture in many ways. It lays out the rights that citizens are entitled to. It establishes those rights, it circumscribes those rights, and it delineates which rights are given precedence over others in many cases. So the reason for that is because, of course, apartheid was in many ways, it was many things, but it was an attempt to strip particularly Black South Africans of the right to vote and the ancillary and the concomitant right to stand for election. So political rights are not just about being able to vote. They're also about who gets to hold power. And Black people were prevented both from voting, but also from holding power in the country. And so, because the Constitution sought to transcend apartheid, the idea that these political rights that are so sacrosanct should be preserved has been echoed in constitutional jurisprudence. So what seemed to resonate with the court, we haven't got their reasons yet, was that you can only tamper with these rights in the most extreme and serious of circumstances, and only with very good reason. Otherwise, these rights should be preserved and left untouched. So when Zuma went to court, he said, these are the rights that are at stake, and there has to be a very darn good reason why they should be tampered with. My right to stand is central to the South African Constitution. And so there has to be a big countervailing argument to dislodge those rights. And it was in that context that the arguments happened. And so Section 47 of the Constitution is the section which was at play here. And this was the section that deals with who can stand for membership of the National Assembly. So let's go through it, right? So every citizen who is qualified to vote for the National Assembly is eligible to be a member of the Assembly. So basically, anyone who can vote can also hold power, except anyone who's appointed by or is in service of the state. This is Section 1A, doesn't apply here. Section B, permanent delegates to the National Council of Provinces, doesn't apply. Unrehabilitated insolvents, doesn't apply here. Anyone declared to be of unsound mind. So basically this section of the Constitution is saying anyone can be in Parliament except for these people. And then we come to Section 47(1)(e). Now let's read this because it's really important. Section 47(1)(e) says, remember, you can stand for Parliament except, and then E, anyone who, after this section took effect, okay, obviously the section took effect a long time ago, so anyone who is convicted of an offence and sentenced to more than 12 months imprisonment without the option of a fine, either in the Republic or outside the Republic, if the conduct constituting the offence would have been an offence in the Republic. But no one can be regarded as having been sentenced until an appeal against the conviction or sentence has been determined, or until the time for an appeal has expired. A disqualification under this paragraph ends 5 years after the sentence has been completed. So this is just a long way of saying that if you've been convicted of and sentenced to more than 12 months, so if you've been convicted of a crime and sentenced to more than 12 months without a fine, then you are one of the people who can't go to Parliament, just like insolvents and other kind of people, unrehabilitated insolvents, etc. But if there's an appeal for the sentence or the crime, that process has to finalize itself. So if it isn't final yet, then the section doesn't kick in. Or remember that even if you have committed this offense and you've been sentenced and 5 years has passed since the sentence has been completed, then you also don't fall foul of the section. So basically, what happened was that the person who objected said, former President Zuma was sentenced to 15 months for contempt of court, which is a crime. Therefore, he's disqualified under Section 47(1)(e) of the Constitution. And the IEC agreed. And one looking at this would think, obviously, definitely, there's no case here for former President Zuma. How would you rescue this situation? You were sentenced to 15 months imprisonment without the option of a fine in the Republic, and 5 years hasn't elapsed since then. So, well, turns out there was a case, and a case which convinced the Electoral Court, sitting with 5 eminent justices. Here's what happened. Really, this is where the crunch of the case was. There were lots of different arguments, but former President Zuma was handed a Hail Mary by President Ramaphosa. Because before the court, what counsel for the Independent Electoral Commission found very difficult to explain and facing a volley of questions around this issue. What became clear was that President Ramaphosa remitted, explain what that means in a second, President Zuma's sentence, which effectively means that although former President Zuma was, and for the purposes of brevity, I'm just going to say Zuma and Ramaphosa, Zuma was sentenced to 15 years, 15 months. But he only served 3 months. Then he was released on medical parole. That was overturned by the courts. But then Ramaphosa remitted the remainder of his sentence. In effect, the sentence became 3 months. So what actually happened when President Ramaphosa did that, little did he know he was laying the groundwork for Zuma to actually be on the ballot, because what was argued in court is that the sentence has to be 12 months or more in practice. And the wide powers that are offered under the Constitution to the president to reprieve offenders or pardon them or remit their sentences, which means to cancel their sentences or to reduce their sentences, those powers have the effect of reducing the sentence. So the sentence, which was 15 months, went down to 3, which means that former President Zuma actually does qualify to be in the National Assembly because his sentence was tampered or interfered with, or a portion of his sentence was extinguished, in the language of some of the justices of the court. So he did not fall foul of Section 47(1)(e). And that, although we haven't seen the reasons, judging by the hearing, which I watched extensively, that is what convinced the court, because you could see from the questioning to both sides that the court was really worried that if the sentence was extinguished, at least partially, it would be very difficult for them to say, no, you still can't go to Parliament. So that's effectively what happened. There were other arguments about whether the IEC had the power to do this, about whether the IEC was biased, about, the conviction, was it really a crime or wasn't it a crime? I think all of those arguments either could have gone either way or maybe against former President Zuma. We'll see what the court says. But this question of the importance of the constitutional rights married with the remittal of the sentence is what has got us here, in my view. And there you go. Ramaphosa helped Zuma get onto the ballot. You can't script it in South Africa. So let's finally end off by looking at some of the implications. Number one, as far as I'm aware, this can't be overturned because the IEC's election timetable has already moved beyond the point where objections can be raised. So there's no way of reversing this as far as I'm aware. I mean, I've learned watching and observing the law and politics, there's always some procedure you can try, but it's very unlikely to be overturned. Isn't it ironic that President Ramaphosa, through his remittal of the sentence of former President Zuma, has actually ended up allowing President Zuma back into Parliament? It's just one of those incredible paradoxes that you'll never truly wrap your mind around. This, I think, is going to absolutely enliven the MK party base. They already come off an impressive court victory around disqualification. They now are looking at a potential court victory around the trademark, although that case is still being heard, and we'll see what the court determines there. And now they have another victory, which is that Zuma can be one of the members on their list. I mean, you can feel the groundswell building around MK, but these court battles, which have been very counterproductive for MK's political rivals in the ANC particularly, and now the IEC battle, have just added impetus to the MK's political momentum, in my view. And I think that they will ride this momentum all the way to the election. And this momentum actually, ironically, might also paper over some of the internal cracks within MK, which may show themselves after the election. But the wave of victory here might be enough to stabilize MK into this election, at least. So I would keep an eye on that, because I've constantly been saying, watch out. Can MK remain internally coherent until the election? Or will its internal fractures be enough to stop it from marching towards a very significant election in 2029, where I think they're going to do well in KZN and in some respects nationally. Look at my last video for how I project the election will go. Zuma is still a member of the ANC. My producer Oratile pointed this out insightfully. So Zuma's a member of the ANC, but he's going to be going to parliament representing the MK. The ANC still hasn't disciplined him. He's defeated the ANC in court various times now. It's just a mess. It's just a movie. It's just a movie. So, will Zuma actually go to parliament? I don't know. He may not want to go to parliament, but that's really beside the point. It's not pertinent, because this electoral victory has already delivered a political victory, whether Zuma goes or not. He has now been vindicated. And it will add to this narrative that Zuma has always tried to build, that he is a victim of a wider conspiracy to prevent him from doing what he's always wanted to do. So, in sum, today's judgment, whether you're watching this on the day or the day after, I think adds great momentum to the MK party's electoral campaign, and will be a serious blow to the ANC, who I think is the party that stands to lose the most from the MK's emergence, at least electorally. We'll see what happens in terms of coalitions. So we are recording this exactly as the order has been released. It's a snap episode. Of course, there'll be more analysis to come, and I'm only just trying to do this from what I understand immediately after the judgment. So do bear in mind that it can take time to process these things in more depth. But I hope that this has given you an understanding of exactly what's happening, exactly what arguments were made in the Electoral Court and their implications for the election and for our democracy more widely. Keep it locked. If you enjoyed this episode and you enjoy the insights that we bring to you on South African politics, like, share, subscribe, and help us get to 100,000 subscribers before the 29th of May. Spread the fire. Keep it locked on SMWX. Ayeye.